So, Dan, thank you so much for coming on the Mindful Parenting podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm so happy you're here. Your books have been like a great inspiration to me, and I love your writing style. And I actually, for readers of Dan's books and Raising Good Humans, you'll recognize that sense of like it's this is incredibly hard, and I sucked at this thing. And here's how something that really, really helped. So I was very inspired also by your work, but I love your story, and you're famously, you know, skeptic of meditation turned into this mindfulness champion. So can you kind of tell the audience who doesn't know that story how that change came about?
Yeah, sure. So the brief version is I was a network news anchor for many, many years, and I had a panic attack on television, which you can Google if you just type in panic attack on TV. I think it's the number one result, which is fantastic. And so this happened about 20 years ago, the panic attack. And after I had the panic attack, I went to a shrink who asked me a bunch of questions. And one of the questions was, do you do drugs? And I sheepishly said yes. And the backstory there is I had spent a lot of time as an ambitious young correspondent in war zones after 9/11. So Afghanistan, West Bank, Gaza, Iraq many, many times. And I came home in the middle of that period and got depressed and did something toweringly stupid, which is I started to self-medicate with recreational drugs. And even though I was not high on the morning I had the panic attack on Good Morning America, my shrink explained to me that my ambient use of drugs like cocaine made it more likely for me to have a panic attack. So this happened in 2004, and this isn't like a neat and tidy story where I quit doing drugs and started meditating, and then everything was rainbow barfing unicorns. There was a few years of me being in therapy, and then eventually I kind of started to hear about meditation, and this was one of the first times in my life where I've ever been ahead of a trend, because I got interested in meditation before it started getting cool again. It had been cool in the 60s and 70s and then kind of fell out of fashion. And then in the late aughts, there was this explosion of scientific research that showed that meditation can lower your blood pressure and boost your immune system and literally rewire key parts of your brain. And I started getting turned on to this and started trying it for myself and seeing that it was really helpful. And then I wrote a book about it that came out in 2014 called 10% Happier, and that swallowed my life.
Well, I think that book did a great deal of good in the world. Because as somebody who looked at the meditation books from like, I don't know, I guess I started looking at them in like 1995 because I was a teenager desperate for some help to like, whatever. There 10% Happier was so refreshing. It was such a refreshing change from like, be here now, which is an amazing book, but not quite as helpful.
What I was trying to do was, because I read a lot of those same books too. When I first started getting interested in meditation, I read a lot of the books, and they are, as you said, they are amazing. And to many people, especially skeptics, they're pretty off-putting. And so I thought, okay, I'll write a book that uses the F word a lot and that tells embarrassing stories like the one I just told about having a panic attack. And my hope was that it would make the practice more accessible to a wider audience.
Yeah. I think it did that. Yeah. For me, it was the books by Thich Nhat Hanh that really made it accessible to me. Yes. And I think your book then made it even more so. And also for me, and for the listener who's been here a while, Carla Naumburg and the way she talks about meditation, you gotta love the way Carla talks about meditation too. She's always been a great inspiration for me. And you talked about, I was reading about that time in your life when you were kind of going through all these different changes and reading about it and learning about this. And I was reading an old CNN article, and you cite like Eckhart Tolle's book as kind of like opening it, being a kind of some ways way too woo-woo for you, but also opening you up to the problem of the voice in our heads. And I'm just kind of wondering, like, if you can remember back to that, what did you realize about your inner voice then? And kind of what don't most of us realize about our inner voices that we maybe should know?
Yeah, I can remember it really clearly. I remember lying in bed reading that book. One of his books is called A New Earth, and it had been recommended to me by one of my producers at ABC News because one of my little side gigs within the network was I covered faith and spirituality, even though I had no interest in even though I had no interest in the subject. But my boss at the time, Peter Jennings, had kind of forced me into covering this thing, and I started to get more interested in it, even though I'm still functionally an atheist or an agnostic. And as part of covering this beat, I started occasionally looking at self-help folks, mostly the fraudsters. We would expose snake oil salesmen and women, and one of my producers recommended I read Eckhart Tolle, but she was totally sincere about it because Eckhart Tolle is not a scandalous figure, although he is beloved by celebrities. And so I thought, I'll read this book because Oprah loves him and Paris Hilton loves him, and maybe there's a story in there. But I wasn't reading it from any personal value. I didn't think I was going to extract any value from it personally. And at first, I was totally turned off by him and the way he talks and the way he writes and a lot of the grandiose sort of pseudoscientific language he uses. But then he said something in this book that I had never heard before that struck me as the most accurate thing I'd ever heard about the human condition, which is that we have a voice in our heads, which is not, I'm not talking about schizophrenia or hearing voices. I'm talking about your inner narrator that chases you out of bed in the morning and is yammering at you all day long and has you constantly wanting stuff or not wanting stuff or judging people or comparing yourself to other people or criticizing yourself or thinking about the past or thinking about the future to the detriment of whatever's happening right now. And when you're unaware of this nonstop conversation that you're having with yourself, and which, if we broadcast aloud, you would be locked up, when you're unaware of it, it owns you. And that was a huge aha moment for me because it made me realize, this, first of all, it's just intuitively true. And it explained the most embarrassing moment of my life, the panic attack on national television. Why else did I go off to war zones without thinking about the consequences other than the voice in my head? Why else did I come home, get depressed, and why was I so insufficiently self-aware to even know that I was depressed? And then why did I blindly reach for cocaine? Because of the voice in my head, or what Eckhart Tolle calls the ego. And he doesn't just mean the ego in the sense of thinking you're great. He means the ego in terms of our discursive thinking. The fact that we have all of this cascade of thoughts all the time, but we have no distance from them. So every thought is taken to be the truth. And so that was a huge aha moment for me. The problem with Eckhart Tolle, I went and interviewed him afterward, is that he, in my opinion, did not have any actionable advice for dealing with your voice, the voice in your head. He, as a friend of mine has joked, he's correct, but not useful. And after interviewing Eckhart Tolle was when I started to, fish around, and that's when I started hearing about meditation and seeing some of the evidence, and I realized, okay, yeah, this is a way to start to manage your thoughts and urges and emotions with some skill and suppleness.
Yeah. With practical action. It's
Yeah.
very practical from sort of my point of view. Yeah. I looked at A New Earth recently because I remember liking it, and I was like, let me look back at it. And I realized it's supposed to be as you go through the book itself, you're supposed to, the book is supposed to be the practical application, the reading of the book, which was kind of interesting. But yeah, I feel the same way about Buddhism, and that my husband and I, we were like, well, we feel like we need something grounding and some kind of community thing. And so we were going to a Unitarian Universalist church, and when I was at grad school in Boston, and then we discovered a Sangha meditation group, and I was like, oh, this is where we're not actually we're not talking about these things, we're doing the thing that is helping us do the thing. I love that you wrote that the first sign of that meditation was not a waste of time came within weeks when I started to overhear my wife Bianca at cocktail parties telling friends that I had become less of a jerk. So then tell us, what did you started practicing meditation? For me, It took me like 10 years of reading about it before I could actually practice meditation and sit down and do it. How did that, something we talk about here a lot is like, let's see if we can, how do we start? How can we get into those kind of beginning stages? So, can you tell us what those beginning stages were like for you and kind of what it was doing for you?
Yeah, I can tell you about my beginning stages, and then I have a lot of thoughts about how to start. I don't think there's anything unusual about what you described about reading about it for years before you get over the hump to do it. I didn't have that problem. I have lots of problems, but I got very curious very quickly and just did it. I remember the first time I did it. I was at a summer house in that I was sharing. My wife and I were sharing with a bunch of friends in the Hamptons in 2009, I think, in that summer. And I was reading a book about meditation kind of furtively by the pool. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go do this. And I went into the room, our room, the room I shared with my wife, and like sat on the floor next to the bed, not with crossed legs because I've never been particularly nimble, but I just kind of leaned up against the bed, set an alarm on my BlackBerry because that's what I was using at the time for 5 minutes, and just did it. And I noticed a couple things. One, this is a cliche about meditation. It's simple, but not easy. Like, it's really hard to try to stay focused on one thing. Usually, it's your breath, and then you're immediately seeing how chaotic the mind is. I think I've described it as it's like trying to hold a live fish in your hands. It's just wriggling away from you all the time. But I immediately saw the value in it. Like, this is not some hippie BS pastime. This is not hacky sack. This is real training for your brain. Trying to stay focused, losing your focus, and starting again is training your capacity to focus, which is under direct assault by almost every aspect of modern culture. Second, and I think more importantly, the waking up from distraction, which is the moment when a lot of people feel that they've failed. Reframing that as success is really important and life-changing, because what's happening in those moments when you try to focus on your breath and then several minutes go by where you're thinking about what's for lunch or you're planning a homicide or whatever it is, and then you wake up. That waking up is proof that you're doing it right. Why? Because in that moment, you're becoming familiar with the voice in your head. And that's the antidote. That is the peaceful disarmament for this obnoxious inner narrator. Just the brute fact of becoming aware of the machinations of your mind so that it doesn't own you as much. And so that was immediately clear to me. And that's why I was able to quite quickly boot up a practice of very short practice, 5 minutes most days. And then it kind of built from there. I want to say, though, that I recognize I'm a bit of a mutant in this regard, in that I have unusual discipline in certain areas. I have zero discipline in other areas, but I'm pretty good at, like, if I decide I'm going to meditate or exercise or whatever it is, I will do it. Most people are not good at this, and most people then suffer from this unnecessary self-flagellation of telling themselves, well, I'm not disciplined, or I lack willpower. It is not personal. You should not blame yourself. You should blame evolution. Evolution bequeathed us a mind that is really good at looking for threats, looking for food, and looking for mates. Short-term rewards are what we are wired for. Therefore, creating habits or reaching long-term goals requires a kind of hacking of the brain. Hacking this ancient brain so that we can get there. And so there's a bunch of science to show, like, what are the right hacks you can use in order to get started. And I'll just share one, and we can talk about others if you want. But one of them is to start super small. Mm-hmm. So I often say 1 minute counts. Like, just do 1 minute while you're putting your kid to bed, for example. I think that's a great moment, because a lot of us are putting our kid to bed. They won't fall asleep. We're stewing. We're annoyed. We're scrolling. We're whatever. But actually, just lying down, tuning into the sensation of your breath coming in and going out, and then every time you get distracted, start again and again and again. Just do a little bit of that, and then you can do the stewing and the scrolling and all that other stuff. But starting really small is a great way to give your brain what it wants, which is short-term rewards. So you start to feel like you've got some wins on the board, and that can build into something much more sustainable over time.
Yeah. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. I love the like pre-bedtime because your kid is like desperate for you to stay anyway. So just sit there at the end of the bed for, and set a little silent timer and see if you can practice that for. I want to go back to what you were saying about the practice itself, like, and just want to underscore for the listener this idea that that it is such a win to interrupt and to notice and become aware of the thoughts, and for me, I think of it as like, I'm sure I've got this metaphor from somebody else, but the idea of like, before that, you're just like in a waterfall of thoughts and you're just under the water and you're just wet and you don't even, it's just, that's what life is. And then it's this like brief moment of like, oh, you step out in front of the waterfall and you're like, there it is. And you're separate. It's so freeing. I just want to underline that for the listener that that's this like space, right? That between stimulus and response. And then that starting small. And it's because it's kind of like, I was thinking about this the other day, actually, like my daughter who's 14, we were walking by the monkey bars and she's like, yeah, she did the monkey bars again. She's like, oh, I could never do a pull-up. And I was like, yeah, there was a time I could do a pull-up. And I realized like meditation in kind of some ways is kind of like a pull-up, right? Like to it's so hard in some ways. Like you said, it's simple but not easy. It's so hard. But if you actually if you get there and you put your arms on the bars and you give yourself, maybe you step on something little and then you engage the muscle, that muscle, even if you don't feel like you get your chin up over the bar, whatever that is for you, like you're still building that muscle and you're going to get the chin over the bar eventually. It's still like building that strength. Even though it feels like, I mean, at least it did for me in the beginning, and I wonder if it did for you. It feels like in the beginning, it does feel like, I just sat here thinking the whole time. That's what I thought. I was like 2.5 months in. I was like, I just sit here thinking the whole time. And I was like, what's happening? But then I saw other benefits. Did you have that same feeling? Or were you immediately tuned into, oh, it is a success when I've recognized the thought?
I've had plenty of self-doubt. And this is a huge thing in practice. You're on meditation retreat. You hear teachers talking about the fact that people are running what they call the practice assessment tapes, just constantly trying to figure out, am I doing this right? Am I doing it right? Am I doing it right? I've definitely been through all of that. But that's just another thing to be mindful of. It's just another thing to notice. Just like anything that's going through the mind, you can drop out of it and see it for what it is, a thought or an urge or emotion. It's all about continuously waking up. And you can have a whole meditation where you only wake up once or twice, and most of the time you're either sleepy or enraged or anxious. It's still a good meditation. You're just starting from where you are and developing your capacity for concentration, which will, I think for most of us, develop quite slowly. Developing your capacity for mindfulness, which is, again, to be able to step out of the waterfall and to see it all without reacting blindly to it. You're developing your capacity for equanimity, which comes over time as you are able to sit with emotions and thoughts that you never thought you could bear. The benefits, just talk about a waterfall. There's a cascade of benefits, and you just have to get started on your own time. Start small, give yourself a break, make sure you get as much support as possible by listening to good podcasts or finding people to do it with. There's a lot of data around the impact of social support, of having a friend or a group of friends who are doing this thing with you. And don't worry if you fall off the wagon. If you miss a day, or you miss 2 days, or you miss a year, you can always start again.
So let's talk about the benefits. Bianca thought you were less of a jerk, I'll say. When you started this practice, how did it affect your outer life?
I mean, I think that is, in some ways, that little comment from Bianca is so important, because it is so easy to sit I mean, we're type A people, so we do something and we expect to win. And so you sit in meditation and you expect to stay with the breath. You're militaristically kind of gritting your teeth and trying to stay as focused as possible, which is really just not going to work. And actually, the harder you try in that way, the harder it is to quote unquote get there. If you can drop the focus or turn down the volume to the best of your ability on the focus on how am I doing it right, and let other people tell you, oh, I'm seeing some change. That's, I think, a better gauge. Because, as Sharon Salzberg says, we're not meditating to become better meditators. We're meditating to get better at life. So one feedback is, does your spouse think you're less annoying? Another feedback is, and then this to me is the magic moment, where you have a desire to do something, to say something that's going to ruin the next 48 hours of your marriage, or to eat something that's going to interrupt your sleep, or to flip somebody the bird or whatever. You have this powerful urge and you watch it come and you watch it go and you don't act on it. That to me is when you can go from extrinsic motivation, which is I'm listening to some schmo on a podcast telling me I should meditate, so that's an external motivation, to intrinsic motivation, which is, oh, now I see the value of this thing that I've been sitting here beating myself up over not being so good at. I just had this moment where I was about to, have a moment of road rage in front of my kids. But instead, I sat with the anger. I watched it mindfully. I saw it rise and fall away. That is an enormously empowering moment. But it takes a little faith to get there. You actually have to have the faith that I'm going to do this practice for a couple of weeks before, for many of us, before we have a moment like that.
Yeah. Yeah. It takes a little while. Yeah. For me, it was yelling, and my anger that was my big motivator to really, really practice, was that. And to see that bit by bit slowly get less and less was like, oh, hallelujah. Thank you.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I'm not going to be ruining this most precious thing in my life. Yeah, okay. All right, so start small. I'd love to hear some more tips for getting started. That'd be great.
So actually, I've been reading up recently on the science of behavior change. And so starting small is really important. There's another precept, which is to make it easy, make it as easy as possible. So starting small is part of that, but creating an environment where the practice that is conducive to the practice. So maybe having a little space or a little room where that's my meditation space, if that's available to you, depending on your living conditions. Another way to make it easy is a technique called piggybacking. So if you've already got an existing habit, like I get up in the morning, the first thing I do is pee. Okay, right after that, I'm going to do a minute of meditation, or right after I brush my teeth, or right after I exercise, I stretch, and then I do a minute of meditation. Whatever it is, if you can identify the habits that are already deeply ingrained and piggyback on top of them. Another way to make it easy is to harness what's called the fresh start effect. So any temporal landmark, like a birthday, a new year, a Monday. So these temporal landmarks are coming all the time. You don't have to wait for something big. There's a lot of data to show that you can harness this sense of a new beginning to start again and again and again. Social support, as we discussed before, is another thing that's really, really helpful. It normalizes the practice for you. Any practice that you're trying to adopt, whether it's exercise or meditation, it makes you accountable to other people, which is another great way to get the habit going. If you really are willing to punish yourself a little bit, there are ways to make it hurt if you don't do a thing. So there are apps like Stick is one app that will give money to a cause that you disagree with unless you meditate or whatever it is. I'm not a huge fan of this tactic, but there is some data behind it. What else can I say that is useful? Tracking has been shown to really help. If you there are tracking apps out there, habit trackers. You can search in the App Store if you want to do that, but you can also just do it in a plain old journal. Just noting what are the days that I'm doing it? What are the days that I'm not? And then if you go back and review it, you can start to see some trends of like, oh, well, does this time of day, am I more likely to do it if I do it at this time of day? Was I less sleepy if I did it at this time of day? Really getting a sense of like what's working. And then also the other benefit of tracking is that it gives you a sense of momentum and a moment to celebrate these small wins. So it's really about, let me say one other thing. Making it meaningful is really helpful. Understanding, and this is a way to tap back into your intrinsic motivation. If you can, if you said before, like you wanted to not yell as much. That's a very meaningful aspiration. And if you can really do your best to tie your meditation practice to your purpose, there's some evidence to suggest that you're more likely to do it. So I'm just throwing a bunch of ideas at you. This is not a to-do list. It's more like a menu that you can choose from. So the bad news is that habit formation is hard for most of us because we have these ancient brains. The good news is there are a lot of techniques that have a lot of data behind them that show that there are ways to hack the brain to make these habits doable over time.
I love that. Yes. We haven't gone over these. This is so wonderful. So I love the thinking about all these ways to track habits and to build this. You got it here from Dan, dear listener. So what about, there's so many people who say like, it's not for me. I mean, and that's why I love the title of your book, Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics. I'm too anxious. I'm too fidgety. And we've talked about things like walking meditation, but is meditation for everybody? I mean, I kind of think like if you can breathe, you can practice, but what do you think? Like, what do you say for people who say, I feel too anxious for this?
I'm pretty dogmatic about being non-dogmatic. I learned really early when I got about 15 years ago when I got interested in meditation. I was super annoying to my wife because I was kind of pushing it on her, and I saw very clearly how stupid that was. And so now I don't, if people ask me to come on a podcast or invite me to give a speech, I'll talk about it. I love talking about it. But I don't bring it up unsolicited, and I don't use the word should. I do think it is doable for anyone. I would add one asterisk, which is if you have serious mental health issues or serious capital T trauma, it's probably good to do this under the supervision of a mental health professional. But for the vast majority of people, I think meditation can be very helpful. Having said that, I'm not a meditation fundamentalist. There are lots of ways to take responsibility for your mental health. Meditation is just one of them. Getting enough sleep, exercising, eating healthy. Here's another asterisk, though. You don't want to be overly obsessive about eating healthy because that can lead to some unhealthy stuff. I think access to nature and beauty is really important and a really good way to boost your happiness. And then I think, and the data support this, the most effective way to boost your happiness is the quality of your relationships. As the great couples counselor Esther Perel says, the quality of your relationships dictates the quality of your life. We're social animals. We got to the top of the food chain because we have this ability to collaborate and cooperate, and we live in a culture that militates against social connection, which is why I believe we're seeing epidemic levels of anxiety, depression, suicide, addiction, and loneliness, especially among young people. And so that's a whole set of skills working on your relationships, which I think is actually the subject of my next book, which is I'm not even close to finishing, but that's a whole art that nobody teaches us. It's so weird. We are these social animals, but nobody teaches us how to actually interact with other people. We don't get that. We get home economics, phys ed, history, math, but like basic interpersonal hygiene is not what most of us are taught. And so, long way of saying, I think meditation is great. I think it would be good for you, the listener. And if you don't want to do it, I'm not here to try to force you. There are lots of other ways to work on your mental health.
I think that's a great way to answer that question. And yeah, I think mindfulness though would help. It helps enormously with our relationships. I mean, that's
Totally.
The whole driver for me, right? Like, is that
Yes.
whole idea of can I be more skillful in my relationships? When I was trying to be more skillful with my daughter, I would learn all these great things ways to respond to my kid and then not be able to implement it. So I needed that that ability to regulate my brain and tap into my prefrontal cortex rather than be hijacked by it.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah,
That makes a lot of
that's so
sense.
essential. So you became less of a jerk. We can become we can become more, have more equanimity, or I like to say we become less reactive, or more, we can become more thoughtful and less kind of like in that fight, flight, or freeze zone, and less anxious, all of those things. So if you have and just for thinking about this idea of mindfulness and meditation with parenting, you're the parent of an almost 10-year-old. How do you think your meditation practice has affected your family and your relationships and your parenting?
I think it's very similar to what you were describing, which is I have moments where I might want to say something or use a tone of voice that wouldn't be super skillful. And some percentage of the time, I can let the anger come and go and take saner action on the other side of it. Doesn't Perfection is not
Mm-mm.
on offer here.
No.
I think I often talk about the fact that what is on offer is messy, marginal improvement over time. But I do think with my son, it's pretty rare that I lose my temper with him. It has happened, of course, but the old me would have been losing his temper way more frequently. So it, in that regard, is extremely, extremely helpful.
I bet you feel lucky that you found the practice before you had your son.
I do. Another benefit that's coming to mind is I think you said earlier that when you have a new child, a new baby, older parents or parents of older children are always saying it goes by so fast. It's like this hiccup or this tick that like they have to say it to you, and it can scan as kind of annoying, but it's super true. It really is. It really is true. The cliches become cliches for a reason. Mindfulness meditation, which is a training in waking up for me, has allowed me to savor moments much more than I otherwise would. I'll just give you an example. Last night, my son asked me to play catch, which he does not infrequently, and I didn't really feel like it. Or I was kind of in a rush, or I was tired. I can't remember what it was. But I did it, and I was awake and aware for it, and recognizing that the 80-year-old version of me will give any amount of money to be back in this moment. There will be a last time he asks me to play catch, and it's not in the distant future. And so that kind of savoring of this fleeting experience, even when it's terrible, because parenting often is terrible, is incredibly valuable, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, we can't just be in a brain of like getting all the things done all the time, going and going and doing and doing and going and doing and going and doing, and then expect ourselves to be able to be present when we get on vacation or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And we're like, then I'll really be with my kids, because you've then trained your brain to not do that, right? To always be in the future, and then you find you can't be present. So, I mean, to me, that's the most salient motivator there could be, right? Like, I want to be here for my life.
Exactly. It may not. There's a meditation teacher named Shinzen Young who says, nothing's going to make you live forever, but this practice will extend your life, if only because you're going to be awake for more of it. You'll be not sleepwalking through the thing. So you will have more life. No matter how long you live, you will have more life if you're awake.
I think that's a lovely way. Okay, so just thinking about this, for the parent who says, yes, I want that. I want that to be more awake. I want to be here for my kid's life. Any suggestions for parents in particular who are living lives where they're going and doing, and they've got little ones, or they've got soccer practice, and they've got school board meeting, and they've got all the different things that we're doing? Any suggestions for that kind of like really full parental lifestyle for bringing this practice into their lives?
First of all, just a ton of sympathy and empathy. I get it. I know what that feels like to be time starved. And I think it's possible that you can justifiably tell yourself a story that you don't have the space to start a new habit right now. So no shame or blame here. And there are little pockets of space that may not be fully optimized in your life. Little moments when your reflexes to scroll or to binge, where you could actually take a minute to do a little bit of meditation. Like we discussed earlier, as you're putting your kid to bed, instead of thrashing around in frustration, use that moment right before you go to bed, right when you wake up, right after lunch, right in that 5 minute period of time when you get your daily dose of FOMO via Instagram. Can you shave 1 minute off of that unhappiness producing moment and do a little bit of meditation? There are, in the interstices of your day, in the little pockets of your day, there are times when you can sneak this in, and it doesn't have to be daily. We were talking before about ways to hack the brain in order to adopt a habit. Another is to be flexible. So a little expression that I like is daily-ish, because if you tell yourself, I'm going to do this every day, I'm going to grit my teeth and do it every day, you will inevitably miss a day, most of us. And then the voice in your head is likely to swoop in and tell you you're a failure, and then you're done. But if you've got this elasticity built into the system, so for a super busy parent, I would say in summation, one, if you want to give yourself a break and tell yourself you're going to meditate later, I'm cool with that. The other is, if you want to start now, you can start super small with like 1 minute counts and daily-ish as your little slogans. And I suspect you will be able to do it in fits and starts, and it will help.
1 minute counts and daily-ish. I think those are really good takeaways. That really tracks for, the most of the meditation I've done and most of the learning that I've done has been in the Plum Village tradition of Thich Nhat Hanh. And what they do is that every week they have a lazy day. Like, it's built in that it's like not every day that you meditate. You have lazy day where you sleep in and you don't meditate and you futz around and you garden and you do whatever, there at the monastery. So I think daily-ish is a really smart way to kind of make this very flexible for people.
We did a whole episode on my podcast about lazy day with a monk from the Plum Village tradition, and I think it's great. You need to have some steam release valves. You need to have some flexibility built into your life. We all need rest. We all need relaxation. We all need room to breathe. So I think it's useful as a habit formation strategy, and I also think it's just useful as a survival tactic in a hectic world.
Yeah. Have an unscheduled day might be another thing, right? Like, to just kind of give us some breathing space is another good idea. This has been so wonderful talking to you. I love your books. I love the 10% Happier podcast. It's such a great podcast. If you haven't listened, dear listener, you have to listen. You'll hear some great, wonderful teachers that I really, really enjoy there. And yeah, is there anything that we missed that you'd like to share with the listener? And then also tell people, about your Substack app too.
One thing that people ask me about a lot, and I'm sure this comes up for you, is, how do you get your kid to meditate? I'll just say that for me, I have decided not to try. I know that he will get it in school, and I think this is a really positive thing. Many schools are really introducing it. I am a big believer in the osmotic benefits of modeling positive behavior. And so with my parents growing up, I do nothing they told me to do. They told me I couldn't eat candy. They told me I couldn't watch TV. I love candy and I work in television, but I do everything that I saw them do. They were really serious about their careers. They were both physicians. They were really serious about their relationship. They were really serious about exercise. I do all that stuff naturally just because I saw it modeled. So my son knows I meditate. He travels with me. Every time I go give a speech, I pull him out of school, which the teachers are going to stop letting me do this. But for now, we've been all over the country and all over the world together. And so he hears me lecture on the subject and watches me sign books and talk to people. And most of the time he's looking at his iPad, but I know it gets in there with him. And so rather than turn him off by lecturing him, I try to just model the behavior. And that's what I recommend to parents is, if you want to have mindful kids, you need to be a mindful parent. And that's, I think, the most powerful way to get this to the kids. Yeah, in terms
Amen.
of, thank you. Yeah. In terms of the other question you were asking me, yeah, I do have a podcast. I also started a little community at danharris.com, which is it's on Substack. But if you go to danharris.com, you'll find it. And there's like a free level where you just get a bunch of emails from me a couple times a week with little pithy practices that you can bring into your life. Read it first thing in the morning and let it color your day. And then there's a paid level where you get access to me and you can chat with me and do live Ask Me Anything sessions and all sorts of fun stuff. And if you can't afford it, you can just email me at free@danharris and I'll give it to you for free.
I love that policy. It's so generous and wonderful. This has been such a pleasure. I got to talk to you for free and ask all the questions I wanted to ask you.
Exactly.
Boy, I'm like a paid subscriber. This is great. Yeah, this has been so great. I really want to thank you for the work that you do. I think that the way you've written with such like humor and so many cuss words has made this thing is so that can feel so inaccessible, very accessible for a lot of people, and that has done a world of good. And I think the ripple effects go far for that work. And so I thank you for that. And it's made an effect for me and other people I know. So thank you for doing the work that you're doing and for leaving TV. They didn't deserve you and coming to the meditators. And thank you so much for coming and joining me here today.
Yeah, thank you for everything you just said, and thanks for having me on.